Okay, good morning everyone. We've heard a lot about mothers today, haven't we? We're sort of going to move and just change a bit. It's all right. I want to tell you first of all a story about three sons, right? They left home and they were very prosperous. And then they got back together again and they said, well, what did you do for Mum? What have you done? Well, they talked about the gifts that they had given their elderly mother. The first said, I built a big house for my mum. The second said, well, I sent her a Mercedes with a driver so she could go out anytime she wanted to. And the third one smiled and said, well, I beat both of you. You know how Mum enjoys the Bible and you know she can't see very well. I sent her a brown parrot that can recite the entire Bible. It took 20 monks in a monastery 12 years to teach him the Bible. I had to pay the monks $1 million, but it was worth it. Mum just has to say a chapter and a verse and the parrot will recite it. Sounds fabulous, doesn't it? Soon after, Mum sent out her letters of thanks. Milton, she wrote the first son, the house you built is so huge. I live only in one room, but I have to clean the whole house. Marvin, she said to another, I'm too old to travel. I stay home all the time, and so I never use the Mercedes. Anyway, the driver is so rude. Dearest Melvin, she wrote to her third son, you were the only son to have the good sense to know exactly what your mother likes. That chicken was delicious. Something I used to always say to my mum, thanks so much, Mum, for bringing me to Australia, because I was born in Germany and I could have ended up in Canada and I wouldn't have met Ray, I wouldn't have met any of you, my life would have been completely different. And every time there's catastrophes overseas, like thousands of them, aren't there? Earthquakes, wars and everything, I always used to say, oh Mum, thanks so much for bringing me to Australia. Now you've got a little black piece of paper and you've got a little wooden, it's a stylus. Now I didn't have many more, so I had to sharpen the ends of all my paintbrushes at home. So don't use the paintbrush, use the little pointy bit. And I want you to write on there, what are you grateful to Mum for? Just write, thanks Mum, and you write one thing, two things, three things. As you think of them during the service, you might want to add a few more things. At the end of the service, we'll blue tack them up onto the board and everyone can have a look at them and see what you're grateful to your Mum for. So thanks Mum, teaching me to make apple pie, or thanks Mum for smacking me with the wooden spoon when I deserved it, or whatever. So just think about some things that you are grateful to Mum for. They could be big things or they could be little things. So you can just keep writing those things on during the service and then we'll put them up later. There are the two men one of them, Moses, this morning, something he might have said to his mum was, thanks Mum for giving me away. We're going to hear about another man who possibly would have said, thanks Mum for giving me away. It wasn't out of choice, was it? As we heard, the Jochebed didn't have much choice. She either had to give him away or he would have died. Either way, she put him into the river Nile that had crocodiles living in it. So he could have got eaten by a crocodile, he could have been found by the soldiers and killed anyway, he could have starved to death, but because she was a woman who trusted God, she was a slave, remember? She didn't have much choice to do anything else, so she did that. So the mother must have been pretty good, I thought, because she brought up Miriam and Aaron, who both accompanied and supported Moses as he later on, took years and years. It wasn't like, oh yeah, here's Moses, grow up and I'm going to lead the people out of Israel. It took years, and a lot of horrible things happened to him along the way, but God always looked after him. And his mum, even though she saved his life, I'm sure she must have put into him, planted in his mind, and when she was weaning him, up to about 4 years of age they did that then, all about God, because he then went into the palace, Egyptian palace, Pharaoh, and would have been taught about all the other gods, but there was something still there. He was later on, he found out more about God. You know, mums have a fantastic influence on their children. And I was thinking about, in the Bible, there's the grandmother and the mother were very instrumental with Timothy. They're mentioned in the Bible. And I wonder about a lot of the other people. What about Jesus? Mary, she was nobody, wasn't she? Really, just a nobody person that God elevated to looking after the baby Jesus. And Moses' mother was just a slave. A lot of the times the mothers aren't famous people or anything, are they? But they're there nurturing, building up, teaching. I thought about Billy Graham's parents. His mother, her name was Morrow, which I have never heard that name before, but you know, they were just dairy farmers. And I read that when he was 6 months old as a little baby, they prayed, his parents prayed, that he might become an evangelist. Isn't that amazing? So Billy Graham went on, didn't he, to do great things, but the mother and father's prayers in the background are what got him there. Winston Churchill, now this is interesting because we read his biography, and it wasn't so much his mum, but his nanny. His mum, I think, was a career woman, and there was a nanny in the house who brought him up. And a lot of his ideas and the way he went, his ideologies, were from the nanny. So you don't even have to be a mum, you can input into people's lives to be like a mother. Because Jesus was like a mother to us too. You remember that story in the Bible where he looks at Jerusalem and he said, I would be like a mother hen and gather my chickens under my wings? And the attributes of the mother come from Jesus. Now, Owen gave the story so well about Moses. But she was a mother who chose to follow God and not the ruler of the land, trusting God that even with the risk of the baby being eaten by a crocodile or drowning or being found by soldiers and killed, she trusted God to keep her child safe. Would her son have perhaps said, "Thank you, Mum, for giving me away"? Interesting, isn't it? How does your faith stack up in regard to your children and your grandchildren and your great-grandchildren, to your brothers and sisters and friends? Are you ready to give them up too? When I told my daughter that I was going to say, I was thinking about the title of the message, and I've got, "Thanks, Mum." But what I really would have liked to have put down, but my daughter said, DHS will be at the church knocking on the door, was, "Mothers, give your children up." And she said, "No, you can't do that." Another mother who also gave her child away was a lady called Hannah. You might have heard about her. Do you know who Hannah was? No? She was married to, she actually was one of two wives from a man called Elkanah in the Bible. There were two wives. One wife had lots of kids, and as it was in that time, how many kids you had determined how important you were and how valuable you were to the society. And she had none, and the other wife used to really stick it to her all the time, even though she was the favourite wife of Elkanah, the husband. They used to go to the temple at Shiloh, and it's interesting, that temple, was it not the Jerusalem temple hadn't been built by then, It was the temple where the Ark of the Covenant was being stored. And that's where the commandments that Moses gave were put into this big box. And it was very precious, and the people thought, it also had the bread in it. Remember when they were in the desert, and every time God in the morning would send them like dew, there would be bread, and quail would come for their food when they were wandering in the desert after Moses took them there. Well, they felt that ark, they called it an ark, it was a box, and it had sort of angels on the top, was very precious, and they said wherever that was, God's presence is there. So every year, the Israelites would go up, or in this area, to that temple to pray to God and bring sacrifices. Poor old Hannah, she would go up there and cry nearly every year because she had no children. So she was pretty much despised by the other wife, and in her own mind, she wasn't much good. She said, Lord, it's no good, I just beg you, please, please, give me a child. And she was there praying, 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 and her lips were moving. She was praying quietly in her heart, and Eli, who was the priest there, saw her, and he looked at her. He wasn't used to this, and he said, have you been drinking? He said, why don't you go home and sober up before you come to the church? It was pretty mean of him, wasn't it? Wasn't a very pastorly thing to say, was it, Larry? Well, you wouldn't say that to somebody, would you?
No, not often.
Not often. That's good. And she said, no, I'm not drunk. I'm just praying to God desperately in my heart. I am so sad. I can't eat. I'm just desperate. I just want a baby. Please, please. And she said to God, I promise you, if you give me a baby boy, I will give him back to you. It's a pretty big vow to make. Do you often make promises to God? Lord, if only you get my bills paid, I'll do such and such. Or Lord, if you would only heal me, I promise I'll dedicate my next winnings in tax lotto to yours. No. But do you know what I mean? We often lightly make vows to God, don't we? Or promises to God that maybe we don't often keep. Maybe we just forget. We're so happy when God answers our prayers, and then we forget. Well, when he realised that she was actually praying, he said, oh, I'm so sorry, it's fine, I'll bless you, and God will give you what you're praying for. He encouraged her. Well, God did answer her prayer, and Hannah remembered her promise to God. I can imagine her telling Elkanah, oh, this is fantastic, we've got this baby boy, but we're going to give him away. I don't know how that would have gone. Can you imagine that conversation around the dinner table, how that would have gone? But he supported her. He must have been a very godly man, and he trusted God too. Actually, God did bless her mightily, and she went on to have 5 more children. But this was her firstborn. So what happened was, they said, yes, we will take the child to the temple and give him to God. She named him Samuel. You heard of Samuel in the Bible? Yeah. Samuel. And when he was weaned, she used to stay home every year with him till he was weaned, and they agreed, and then she would take him to the temple in Shiloh and leave him there. And that was the reading we read. We just can't imagine anything like that happening today, can we? Don't let anybody bring their child here to the church and walk away and leave him, please.
Felt like it a few times.
Yeah, you felt like it a few times, yeah. But you know what? This was even a much more difficult thing that, well, I think in Hannah's eyes that it must have been, because you know what? The temple environment there was not good. It was not good at all. Eli was actually in big trouble with God because he had two sons, grown-up sons, who were meant to be priests in the temple as well. But they were not good people. They were bad people. They used to steal the sacrifices. They used to go, when people brought their sacrifices, like we heard in the reading, to the temple, it was meant to be as a sacrifice to God. And the priests were allowed to have some, but these guys would go and get the best of the meat. And they'd get in there before it was even properly sacrificed. The Bible says they were actually very wicked. Not only that, they were immoral as well. They were doing things they shouldn't have done with the ladies in the temple. So you can imagine and people knew about it. They knew that these sons were bad. God sent somebody, and we don't know who he was, an unnamed person, and said to Eli, you have not brought your sons up well, and you're not controlling them. You're letting them do evil things. Your whole lineage, your whole line will go. Your sons are going to be killed on the same day, and you will die as well. And he still wasn't able to, I think by then, they were too far gone. He wasn't able to pull them into line. Imagine leaving a little 4-year-old in that sort of environment. Can you imagine that? How hard it must have been for Hannah to do that. How could she do it? How? How could she have done something like that? What do you think? What do you reckon, Hank? How do you reckon she would have had the strength to do that?
I doubt I would have had the strength.
I know. I don't think I could have done it either. I would have moved in the temple with them maybe. But you know what I mean? What an impossible thing. And yet she did it. I think she did it because she trusted God implicitly. She had trusted him and prayed to him for this son. And she knew that no matter what happened, God would look after him. How she must have prayed. And every year she made a little coat. And she would take it up every year when they went to the temple to sacrifice. So I can imagine each year it would get bigger. So I can imagine her spinning the wool, weaving it together, making this little coat. And I bet you that every thread that went into that coat was covered in prayer. Don't you reckon? That would have been the only way. And it reminded me of what you did, Liz, of those beautiful shawls you made for Larry's granddaughters. The same sort of thing. I'm sure prayer would have gone into that, and love. You had the little poem that was able to be given to them so that they would know that they were loved. And you made a little beanie for little Sammy too, to clothe. A little doll, was it? Yeah. Dina made the beanie, didn't she? For Sammy's head when her hair fell out. So you see, we can do things like that too, and I'm sure those things, that beanie would have been covered in prayer as well, and I'm sure that Hannah's coat was covered in prayer, every stitch. And you know what? The Lord safeguarded Samuel, and he grew into one of the best prophets ever in Israel. This was the time before they had the kings. They had no kings, so they depended on people like Samuel to tell them what God wanted them to do. And he grew into being the best one. 1 Samuel 3:19 to 21 says, Samuel grew up, God was with him, and Samuel's prophetic record was flawless. Imagine growing up in that environment, and yet he was the best prophet, and whatever he said about God, it was flawless. Everyone in Israel, from Dan in the north to Beersheba in the south, recognised that Samuel was the real thing, a true prophet of God. And God continued to show up at Shiloh, revealed through his word to Samuel at Shiloh. So whatever Samuel said was broadcast throughout Israel. How proud his mum must have been. Don't you reckon how proud Hannah would have been? And you know, reading the situation that Samuel went into resonated with me as we look around our society today. The world our children, grandchildren and great-grandchildren are in is similar to the environment that Samuel grew up in. Today it's very different, isn't it, to the years when we grew up in. The challenges for them seem to be much harder and much more dangerous, don't you reckon? When we look back, our lives seem to be much simpler, much more straightforward. We knew who we were, we knew our roles, and we knew that God was in charge, and the country was different. The whole parliament and everything was different. Social media seems to have taken over many of our children's lives, and the ways of the past seem to have been forgotten. Wars, COVID, corruption in authority, and peer pressures seem to swirl around our young people, seeking to grab them and pull them down. That's what it feels like, I reckon, in today's world. And our kids and grandkids have to struggle against that and fight against that as well. However, what can we do about it? It's really hard to know, isn't it, what to do, because our lives have been so different. However, Hannah's prayers changed the outcome for Samuel. If she had just put him there and left, I don't think it would have worked. But I'm sure that her prayers behind changed the outcome for Samuel. Her trust in God is what enabled her to go through with her vow, as we said before. So why should it be any different today? Isn't God the same today? Is he the same God that was the God of Hannah? Yeah? You agree? So why should it be any different today for our families and friends? What's to stop us from praying to God for their safety, for the best life for them, for their salvation, and a life spent in service for Jesus? I don't know about you, I'm not very good at constantly praying as much as I should. I know I should pray a lot more for the kids. Usually when they're in strife, then I pray. But we shouldn't. We should pray before that happens. We should pray so they're protected. So why is prayer often the last resort instead of the first thing we do? I want to tell you a story, and if I start crying, just ignore me. But there's a story about Horatio Stafford, who you might have heard about. We're going to hear something that he wrote soon. He was an attorney in the 1800s, and he was a real estate investor. So he became very wealthy. But then there was, because he invested in real estate, there was a great fire in Chicago in 1871. You would know all about that, wouldn't you, Gordon?
I wasn't there.
No, but you're a trivia buff, so you would have known that, I'm sure. At the same time as he lost his fortune and all his real estate, his little son died, 4 years of age, died of scarlet fever. So to try and help the family get over it, he sent his wife and 4 daughters for a holiday in England in a ship and planned to join them later on. So he sent them ahead. However, as the ship was crossing the Atlantic, it collided with another ship. And out of the 300 people that were on board the ship, 200 of them drowned, including his 4 daughters. Can you believe that? I told you I'm going to start crying in a minute. Anyway, he rushed to England to be with his wife who had survived. She sent him a telegram and said, "I'm the only one who survived. What will I do?" So he rushed to England to be with his wife and to help her cope. How could he cope? How could they cope with something like that? How would he feel? He's reminded me of Job. Lost his fortune, lost all his livelihood, lost all of his children. What will he do? Will he be like Job? I wonder. As he was on the ship going over to England to meet up with his wife, he passed over the place where his girls had drowned. You're going to start crying too, I'm telling you. You better all get your hankies out. But God comforted him at that time. He prayed to God, and you know what? Hope filled his heart. Can you believe that? Hope and comfort. All right. He knew that God had. Hang on a sec. Larry said it was all right if I cry, so you'll have to excuse me. Here you go. He knew that God had his children in his arms. They were safe. Can you believe that? And as a result, he wrote, "When peace like a river attendeth my way, when sorrows like sea billows roll, whatever my lot, thou hast taught me to say." What's the next word? You're supposed to. It is well with my soul. Can you believe that? See, I find that really, really hard. I told you I'll be a mess today. And I want you to remember, even if things go bad with your children, when they are committed to Jesus, they are always safe. No matter what happens, they are with him if you commit them to Jesus. Agree? Agree. Yeah. Let's pray. Jesus, we come to you looking back to thank you for our mothers especially, and all the people who have nurtured us to shape the people we are today. Lord, we trust you. We bring our children, our grandchildren, and great-grandchildren to you. Life is often confusing to us, and we often struggle to know how to help our families. However, you know what to do, and we trust you, Lord. You have been here from the beginning, and you will be here at the end. Remind us every day to pray as Hannah did and Jochebed did, as they had to relinquish their children into your hands. As you guarded and used these two children, we want the same for our families too. We trust you, Lord, to do this for our families as we commit ourselves to pray for them. Thank you, Lord, as we willingly give our children to you. Amen.